Hello, I'm happy to be with you today. I'm Lynne Baab, and I'm going to be talking to you about listening with empathy, empathy as a practice that we engage in while we listen. And I want to open with my favorite empathy story. So I have a 9-year-old granddaughter. 5 years ago, she was four, and we were sitting on the sofa playing dolls. There were two or three dolls on the sofa with us, and different things were happening to the dolls that my granddaughter was generating. This is happening to this one, she's telling me, and this is happening to that one. And then she turns to me and she says, you know, this one, who we call Dolly, Dolly lost her cat. And I said, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Did you tell Dolly that you're sad about that? And she said, well, why would I say that? I'm not sad. She's the one who lost her cat. So that's the essence of what empathy is you lost your cat. I think you feel sad, and I feel sad too. That was something you can imagine that led me to look into how do we teach children about empathy. And I'm happy to tell you that at 9, my granddaughter is way more empathetic than she was. So I want to put up slides while I talk because I've got a lot of quotations that are relevant, and I wanted you to be able to see them and read them as I was talking. So let me get that set up. So I'm going to be focusing this talk on four specific questions and hopefully give you a lot of food for thought about these four questions. One, is empathy valuable? Two, what is empathy? Three, how do we grow in empathy? And four, what blocks empathy? And as we start, I'm going to give you 20 seconds of silence. I'm going to do this 3 times during the talk. You don't have to worry that I'm going to do it over and over and over. I'm going to give you 20 seconds to think about an instance when someone cared for you in a way that felt empathetic. And I want you to think about how it felt to you. Okay, so take 20 seconds to think about that. So I wonder how that felt. I wonder what you're thinking. I wish there was a way to get feedback. So let's dive into our first question here. Is empathy valuable? And I have a quotation from a research study, an academic journal. Empathy and compassion have become a major focus for international research, and they appear to be important concepts in human development. Philosophical and psychological interest in empathy was revived in the 1990s with the discovery of mirror neurons. And I want to say a word about mirror neurons and how they help us and why they would have precipitated this uh, onslaught of research about empathy in the last few decades. So, in the 1980s, scientists put some electrodes in the brains of monkeys, and in 1991, they published a study about what they found. So they found that we have monkeys. Let's start with monkeys have neurons that fire, for example, when they raise their hand. Okay, so those neurons fire when they raise their hand, but a subset of those neurons fire when the monkey sees someone else raising their hand. So those were called mirror neurons. And later they did research on humans. The research on mirror neurons in humans is very well substantiated. And I raise my hand, and some neurons fire. I see you raise your hand, and about 10 to 20% of those neurons fire. So in me, well, my hand is not moving, but your hand is moving. And so I am picking up on something from you. And given that I believe human beings were made in the image of a communal and social God, mirror neurons are essential for us to learn and pay attention to other people, what they're doing, how we can live together. So neuroscientists began to hypothesize that also, when I'm sad, a certain number of neurons fire in my brain. But when I see you sad, some of my neurons are mirror neurons. And so I feel sad along with you when you're sad. That's kind of the essence of empathy. Could be happy. I feel happy when you're happy, could be angry, whatever. But anyway, mirror neurons are in dispute among neuroscientists related to the exact role of what they do with respect to emotions. But at the very least, they lay a foundation for empathy. They lay a foundation for us to engage with emotions of other people. So I have three quotations that I pulled off the internet for you about research about empathy. So the first quotation comes from the field of management or business. And this is from a consulting group that says evidencing empathy leads to negotiation success. So empathy is a good idea in management because it helps with negotiation. In education, students who are empathetic are more cooperative in class. They have better relationships with their teachers and they are more engaged in school. Students with more empathy tend to have higher GPAs and eventually greater success in college. And this is from a center at UC Berkeley. So, first one, a group of consultants. Second one, related to education, an education center at UC Berkeley. So this is not, neither of these are original research. These are people who are looked at research and tried to apply it to their fields. The third quotation that I have from you relates to personal coaching, and this is from an academic journal. Client perceived coach empathy positively influenced how clients view coaching success. Now, I have to tell you, the comedy is that when I first read this quotation, I thought it related to athletic coaching, but I read a little bit more. Oh, this is about personal coaching. Okay. So, couple things. I looked up athletic coaching and empathy, and oh my gosh, there were bazillion. Again, same kind of pattern. Academic articles, centers, and you might say serious research places that that are drawing on academic research, and then also consulting groups and coaching support groups and all that kind of stuff. Just a wide mix of people. He is a huge, huge topic right now, and lots of interest in it and lots of talk about it, wide range from academic journals all the way to popular blog posts. I want to encourage you to think about your interests now. Are you interested in parenting, or perhaps you're a nurse? Look up empathy and parenting or empathy and nursing, being a nurse, because I'll tell you, if you look up empathy in nursing, you're going to get stuff about breastfeeding as well as being a nurse. I mean, the amount of stuff out there about empathy is amazing. And I also want to put in a little recommendation to use Google Scholar for some of your searching, because Google Scholar, often when you search there, all you can read is the abstract, but frankly, that's enough. You can read an abstract of an academic study and get an idea. Oh, they were asking these questions, and here's the answers that they got. I really, in my scouting around online, I didn't find anything that said, empathy is really a bad thing. Don't use it. The research all seems to say people who use empathy are, more successful, etc. However, this is a note that I want to make right now. Empathetic listening is exhausting. Use it sparingly. A lot of listening can be objective and not empathetic. And I'm going to give several examples here of the difference between objective and empathetic listening. Okay, so one example would be, imagine that your neighbors are leaving on vacation, and you've talked with them several times about this vacation. You're really aware that they're anxious about this, neighbor's anxious about a number of things about the vacation. And so you've had a lot of conversations where you tried to listen empathetically to the concerns. You're at their house now because they want you to feed their cat and water their plants while they're away. And cat food, finding where the cat food is, and figuring out this plant needs this much water and this plant needs that much water. This does not require empathetic listening. It's okay. It's not only okay, it's right to not listen empathetically to when you're gathering information about something. And I might say the same thing. um, this talk that I'm giving now came about as a series, as a part of a series where people at my church are going to learn how to listen to each other better when they disagree about things. Okay, so maybe you disagree with someone, and maybe there's some fact gathering that has to go on before you get to the empathetic listening stage of the conversation. And the fact gathering, why does this matter to you? What are the factors in your life that led this to matter to you? What, who are the authorities? Where do you find information about this in the Bible? Now, any of those topics might verge into some real passion and emotion. And that's when then you engage your empathetic listening skills. But you don't need to engage them every moment of every conversation. And another time that empathy skills can be even should be set aside is when a relationship is heavily characterized by empathy, so heavily characterized by empathy that there's a danger of enmeshment between the two people. And, you know, there's not time in this talk to go into the question of enmeshment and what that looks like. But it's important. And if you feel that you are always engaging with other people's emotions, it might be time for you to think about this question of objective listening versus empathetic listening. When is each one appropriate? And it also might be appropriate to think about, when does my empathy go too far? Because it's possible for it to go too far. Most of us really need to ramp up our empathy skills, but I imagine, someone listening to this talk who needs to ramp down their empathy skills. So that's the note. That's the wrapping up of, is empathy valuable? The answer is yes, very valuable. But yes, occasionally we need to ramp it down. So I want to dive into the second question: what is empathy? And any Christian talking about empathy has to look at two other words: compassion and sympathy. The word empathy is not used in the Bible. Compassion is used 63 times, and sympathy three times. They're used as a positive, good thing in the Bible. Both compassion and empathy. Etymology of these three words is so similar. It's really fascinating. Compassion comes from Latin. Means with, and passion means suffering in Latin. So compassion means with suffering, or suffering with. And that fits pretty well. That's how we view compassion in many different verses in the Bible. Sympathy is very similar, only it comes from Greek, and it means with feeling, or we might change it around to feeling with someone. Compassion, suffering with someone. Sympathy, feeling with someone. Now, empathy is really interesting, also from Greek. The M in empathy means in. So, literally, if you're going to take the word apart, it would mean in feeling. So, maybe if you switch that around to feeling in, that doesn't really fit in English either. But it's the idea that the feelings that other people are experiencing, we feel them inside, in feeling. So, a standard comparison of sympathy and empathy that I've heard for many years is that empathy is when I say to the doll who's lost her cat, "Oh, I'm so sad you lost your cat." And then sympathy would be more, "It's too bad you lost your cat." Personally, I think both are valuable. I think it's crazy to say that only empathy matters. And there's a lot of stuff out there right now saying only empathy matters. Sympathy is bad. Don't do it. Don't use it. It's paternalistic. It looks down on the person. And I don't know. I was raised by a mother who has many narcissistic characteristics. I don't recall one moment of empathy from my mother in my life. And definitely not in my childhood. And when I was a kid, even a little sympathy would have gone a long way. Oh, that's too bad. I would talk about something I was upset about, and there was just a lot of advice and a lot of you'll get over it and a lot of changing the subject. So, my experience is even a little bit of sympathy goes a long way that's positive. I want to mention the Brene Brown YouTube video that's entitled Brene Brown on Empathy, very easy to find. 20 million people have watched it. So who am I to disagree with Brene Brown's take on sympathy? Well, I do disagree. I want to start, though, by saying how wonderful I think her take on empathy is. She it's just wonderful. She has someone walking along, cartoon character, walking along and falls into a pit. And the empathy character comes along and gets a ladder, puts the ladder down the wall of the pit, climbs down into the pit, puts their hand on the person's shoulder and says, I'm here with you. I mean, really, the most beautiful picture of empathy. You're in a pit and I'm here with you. I care that you're in this pit. I feel sad too about you being in this pit. All of that is just such a vivid picture of empathy. Then her sympathy character arrives, and her sympathy character climbs down the ladder and well, says a couple things from the top, climbs down the ladder, paints a cloud on the wall of the cave there or the hole, and then tries to put a silver lining around the cloud. And Brene Brown argues that putting silver lining around things is what we do when we're sympathizing. And again, I completely disagree. I think that trying to always put a silver lining is a failure of listening or a failure of empathy. And here's what her description of a silver lining looks like. Maybe you had a miscarriage and her negative person, her silver lining person says, well, at least you know you can get pregnant. And maybe you're having marriage challenges, and the silver lining person says, well, at least you have a marriage. Now, these are really great illustrations of ineffective and unkind listening, I think. And so, very clear that we don't want to do that. I love the way that Brene Brown describes empathy, though. She talks about it as feeling with others. She says it's a sacred space and it fuels connection with others. She describes another researcher who has proposed three characteristics of empathy. One is recognizing another person's perspective. Another is recognizing the emotions that the other person is feeling and communicating that you recognize them. And then thirdly, no judgment. So, I don't know what judgment looks like for you, but, one judgment, judgment can relate to anything from it's all your fault that this happened, which is a little bit of what I got when I was a kid with the non-empathetic listening. But judgment can also be a person who's really happy, and you could be happy with them. That would be empathy. Or you could be judgmental, and that would be saying, well, it won't last. Don't take this for granted. It won't last. Many, many forms of judgment. But we want to affirm that that empathy really is that feeling with. So I want to go back to compassion a little bit and sympathy, and just give you a glimpse at some of the scriptures that, some of the many scriptures I mentioned compassion. So in the Old Testament, there's a number of passages that talk about God as being compassionate. So Psalm 145:9, the Lord is good to all, and his compassion is over all that he has made. And Jesus has compassion numerous times when he sees people in need. One of my favorite ones is the Matthew 9:36. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them. It goes on, for he saw that they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And there's the good shepherd coming. The Apostle Paul encourages us to nurture compassion and empathy. From Philippians chapter 2, if there is any encouragement in Christ, any consolation from love, any sharing in the Spirit, any compassion and sympathy, make my joy complete, be of the same mind. So here, compassion and sympathy are equated, or they're made parallel in value. They're valuable, along with encouragement in Christ and consolation from love, sharing in the Spirit. So this is part of why I have so much trouble with all the stuff out there right now that's saying that sympathy is a bad thing. Sympathy is not as deep a connection as empathy, but it's a connection that cares about what's going on with another person. In Colossians, the Apostle Paul suggests that we clothe ourselves with compassion, compassion as clothing. That's pretty cool. So I want to go on to definitions of empathy. Um, I got this general online discussion. It's very vague, and I wanted you to see the vagueness. Empathy is a broad concept that refers to the cognitive and emotional reactions of an individual to the observed experiences of another. So it's a broad concept. Be sure that when you think about empathy, be sure to make it as localized as you can in a way that makes sense to you. So here's a way more specific definition. I'm going to start with the middle sentence of the definition. Scholars recognize that empathy is an important element in understanding and maintaining good interpersonal relationships. Okay, that's what all that research earlier on that I cited is trying to say. Scholars recognize that empathy matters. Okay, so what is empathy? Empathy is a cognitive process of identifying with or vicariously experiencing the feelings, thoughts, or attitudes of another. When we empathize, we are attempting to understand and or experience what the other person understands and or experiences. So I've highlighted three verbs in this definition: identifying with, experiencing, and understanding. These are the effort that we make. Empathy is a cognitive process. It's really easy to think that empathy is simply a bunch of emotions. Oh, you feel sad, I feel sad. Okay, we're feeling sad together. Isn't that a good thing? I'm so glad I'm joining in your sadness. Empathy is a cognitive process where we choose to seek to identify with the other person. We try to experience what they're feeling and we try to understand what they're feeling. So it is, um, empathy is an emotive process. It is a cognitive process, and it's a physical process too, because obviously the mirror neurons are involved. So it's physical at the neurological level. It's also physical in our body. Sometimes you see someone suffering and you have feels like a gut punch to you. So empathy involves our whole being, and that's really important for us to remember. It's not just emotions, although emotions really matter. So I have a couple things here that are like questions or notes. One is, if empathy means feeling the same emotions as another person, then empathy is always partial, never complete. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't try to have empathy? No, we should absolutely try to have empathy, but at the right time, not all the time. But it's not perfect empathy. And I guess I just don't want anyone to think that there's some sort of state of perfection of doing it. That sets up a really impossible standard that we can never meet. And another interesting question is, do compassion and empathy always include action? Some Christians argue that compassion always involves action in response to the pain of others. And this is a question to me. I ponder this. I think in the vast majority of times, at the very least, compassion or empathy for me involves saying a prayer for the other person. Many times there's the face to face or Zoom to Zoom action of smiling when they're smiling, or expressing sadness when they're sad, or frustration when they're angry, or whatever. So there's that kind of response. And then there's the big responses, of course, where we take a meal to someone who's hurting, or we do a different kind of action of kindness. We invite someone over when we sense that they're lonely. So usually it does seem to me that compassion and empathy result in an action, but not always. And so it's a question that I encourage you to ponder and think about. So that concludes what I have to say about what is empathy. And let me go on to how do we grow in empathy. Um, Watch for signals. That's number one. I've got 5 or 6 points here under how do we grow. But first is we watch for signals. We make an effort to understand the conversation partner. We treat the conversation partner as someone with value. We pay serious attention to what they're saying. We pay serious attention to what they feel about what they're saying. We try to be observant and we try to read nonverbal behavior. So, my darling granddaughter has this amazing ability to communicate emotions with her body. And sometimes I'll say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, we're not going to be able to do that." And she does this droopy thing and she droops, her whole body droops, and she walks away all droopy. And it's just such a vivid portrayal of the fact that emotions reflect in people's bodies, and we need to be watching that. And then these two really key questions. What emotions do I believe the person is experiencing right now? And what are the cues the person is giving that I'm using to draw this conclusion? So these are questions we can bring into um, our conversations all the time. What are those emotions? And then kind of backing up a teeny bit. How do I think they're being communicated? What are the cues? Um, all of these require that we let the other person talk. And all of these require that we don't jump in with our own story as quick as we can. All of these require giving the other person a platform, letting them be platformed, maybe for 2 minutes, maybe for 5 minutes, maybe for 15 minutes, but letting the other person talk. You can't do these things when you're trying to be sure that you say something as well. That's one of the huge challenges of developing listening skills in general and empathy in particular. Now, here's some more solutions for how do we grow in empathy. I feel really strongly about learning from Jesus. I taught a class once for a Bible college on the Gospels. It was a long time ago, and I felt fairly insecure about doing it. And so I read through, I just to begin with preparing for it, I read through all four Gospels straight through and was astonished at Jesus, the way he talked, the way he listened, the way he cared. Oh my gosh. So if part of the Christian journey, maybe the core of the Christian journey, is being transformed into the image of Christ, then watching for compassion and empathy in Jesus's interactions with people and modeling ourselves after him is a good idea. Another completely different way that we grow in compassion is that and empathy for others is that we practice self-compassion or self-empathy for ourselves. Now, a couple things to say here. One is last week I read an article about self-compassion and self-empathy, making the argument that they were two totally different things. Self-compassion is really saying to ourselves, "Oh, that's okay, that's okay," where self-empathy involves a little bit of standing apart from ourselves and observing what's going on, and then having compassion for ourselves. So I found it a teeny bit difficult to see the difference between these two ideas, but psychologists tell us that if we can't have sympathy or empathy for ourselves, we're not going to be able to have it for anybody else. Now, ironically, I think for some Christians, some of us have more compassion and empathy for others than we have for ourselves. And I think maybe we need to learn to have the kind of compassion and empathy for ourselves that we give to others. I don't know. But I think that what we can say for sure is that empathy and compassion for ourselves is part of a cycle of empathy and compassion for others, and they feed each other and they fuel each other. So that's another major area that's worth pondering. So use a variety of listening skills. That's a place where I want us to pause again, and I want to ask you to spend a couple minutes in silence. And I want you to think about the kinds of listening skills that people have used or a person has used when they showed you empathy. Okay, so take 20 seconds. What kind of listening skills did people use? So let me name some listening skills, and you can ponder whether you see them when you've experienced empathy. So one listening skill is body language, eye contact, paying attention to the person who's speaking. Another one is those, they're called minimal encouragers, and they're things like, uh-huh, yeah, oh, yeah, wow. The one word or very short or sounds, that we make, that we encourage the person to keep talking. See, that's this whole thing of letting the person have the platform, letting them keep talking. Another listening skill that might relate to empathy in your experience would be questions. Maybe the question, how did you feel about that? Maybe you don't like that kind of question, but maybe a kind of question, tell me more about that, or tell me how that worked out. Ooh, what happened next? That kind of thing. Another significant listening skill related to empathy is silence, just simply not talking. And then there's a key listening skill related to empathy called reflecting. And I really want to encourage you to focus on developing this listening skill called reflection. Now, reflection is a statement, not a question. And I'm going to give you quite a few examples here. So, one might be, let's go back to the neighbor who's going on vacation. The neighbor's talking about the fact they're all going to share a big house. So, reflecting might be a simple statement. Oh, you're going to share a big house. Not, you're going to share a big house? That's a question, even though it's not phrased as a question. Just a statement. Oh, you're going to share a big house. Or it might be, you're most worried about the fact that you're going to share a big house. Or you have a lot of anxiety about sharing a big house. Or you're worried about being in the same house with that relative who's challenging to you. I mean, the reflecting could say any number of things about the big house, but it's just a statement. And it gives the person a chance to respond. And I have to tell you, we can be wrong when we reflect back. So maybe I've said, so you're anxious about sharing the big house, and the neighbor says, well, no, it's not really about sharing the big house. It's really just about that I'm going to be around that challenging relative for that period of time. I think it's just going to be too much. So when we reflect, we're showing that we're listening. So it fulfills a wonderful purpose that way. Reflecting also shows that we're paying attention to the person's emotions and thoughts about what's happening. We're trying to remember those verbs. We're trying to experience, feel, and understand what's going on with the person. And it also shows that we're open to more information. Oh, no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I thought. So think about the setting where you're with someone with whom you have a profound disagreement, and you're trying to listen. You've listened to some facts about where the disagreement, is rooted and where they learn about the topic and stuff. And so maybe now you say, tell me about some people, maybe in your teen years or young adult years, who influenced you on this subject. Well, as they're talking about an influential person or event or group or whatever, you can reflect back, that group really mattered. That person was really important. You found that book very challenging and helpful. I mean, it's just reflecting back. We can reflect back. I see in your face your joy when you describe that mentor, or even more briefly, I see joy in your face. I see gratitude in your face. So you can reflect back just simply what you see in someone's body language and face. So my key question here about all these ways of learning and growing, I mean, um, there's a topic that I really, really can't relate to at all. And that topic is football. So when someone is distraught because their football team has recently lost, I don't get it. I don't care. It's just incredibly challenging to me to try to have any empathy at all. So should I use some of these listening skills anyway and pretend that I have empathy? Should I say, "Oh, you're sad about this. Oh, you're really sad about this. Oh, you were so engaged in this football season." I mean, I'm talking about using one of these, not all of these at once, but one of these. You were really engaged in this football season. That's an empathetic statement, even though inside I'm not So is it okay to just cognitively try to be a better listener when you could say my heart's not in it? Well, yeah, I think the answer is yes. And the way I've written the question on the slide is, when empathy feels hard to achieve, should we act like we have it in the hopes that the action will nurture an inward change? Yes, sometimes our actions nurture an inward change, and that's truly wonderful. And we can pray for that. Prayer has to be a significant part of empathy. It's just a hard thing to do. So that concludes my thoughts about how do we grow in empathy. And I want to talk about what blocks empathy. Oh my gosh, the biggest block to empathy is what's going on in our minds. If empathy is a cognitive process, then it, as well as an emotive and physical process, it bumps up against all the other cognitive processes going on in our minds. And some of those are the to-do list. I can't platform you for 5 minutes and let you talk about that vacation when I've got this enormous to-do list. I've got to go buy groceries and I've got to do this other stuff. I just can't do it. Hurry up, hurry up, hurry up. Okay. That makes it really hard to empathize. Another form of inner noise is our discomfort with problems that can't easily solved. We need to fix things. We can't bear. We want, make suggestions. Well, when we shared a house on a vacation, we did this and this and this, and that really helped. That might be appropriate, but that's not empathetic listening, just for the record. And often it's not helpful because the person's already thought about a bunch of different solutions. We often have a need to prove that we're right. This is particularly relevant when we're trying to engage in empathetic listening with somebody with whom we disagree. There might be closed body language, not really that, but more like crossed arms, leaning back. Not all of those. All of those can block empathy. And we say things that block empathy. Obviously, advising, this is my personal favorite. This is what I think that you should do. Reassuring, I'm sure it will work out okay. So I want to really comment about that for a minute. It is totally appropriate at times to say, I'm sure that it will work out okay. I mean, I'm sure I'm sure that that's a good thing to say sometimes. But a lot of times we say it way too soon. And we say it because all that inner noise, I'm not comfortable with the issue she's talking about. I don't want to listen to it anymore. I got to get onto my to-do list. Go, 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 go. We just want to be done with the conversation. And so we say, I'm sure that it will work out fine. You're good. You're competent. You'll figure it out. You're great. And I have to say, this is one of the ways that empathy and sympathy were shut down in my childhood. You'll figure it out was a real common thing that I heard when I was a kid. Now, I've put on this slide a whole bunch of ways. And I mean, I'm sure that most of the people watching this talk, if you're motivated to watch a talk on empathy, you're not going to do most of these things. You're not going to, well, you might do some of them. You might do the third one. Let's look at the reasons you made that decision. Let's look at the reasons why you're going on vacation with the whole family in one house and why you decided to do that. Let's go back and be logical about this. But the judging, you botched that, name calling, you teachers are all alike, diagnosing. Your biggest problem is interrogating. Why did you do that? Distracting. Let me tell you about this. Well, those I don't think many of the listeners would to this recording would do. But distracting, let me tell you about the other thing. I mean, my gosh, that one is really, really common because we're kind of tired of the topic. Minimizing, at least you have a car. Don't do that next time. You'll regret it if you do that. You should have been more careful. Yeah, you should have been more careful, as I've heard that quite a few times in my life too. But all of these are just pop out of our mouths. Just not all of them, some of them pop out of our mouths way too easily. So I just want to emphasize again, we need the Holy Spirit's guidance and power to grow in empathy. For a Christian, prayer must be a foundation for empathy because empathy is hard, and it's also hard to know when to use it. It's hard to know if this is a time that I'm really should not be focusing on the person's emotions. I focused on their emotions too much, and I'm in danger of not letting them feel like they're competent and can solve this on their own. We need the Holy Spirit's wisdom and guidance to know when and how to let go of the to-do list, and when and how to let go of all the inner noise. It's really a challenge to empathize well and to do it wisely. So my last slide is some resources. I'll leave this up so you can take a screenshot if you're interested or whatever, while I tell you about some of my latest observations about conversations. So this is material I've never written anything about. I'm just starting to think about. And I have been noticing that there's three major forms of conversations that I observe anyway. One is the kind where one person talks all the time. And that one is not very pleasant. And I hope that's not me very often. But the kind where there's a back and forth take two different patterns that I've noticed. And one of those patterns is where I tell a story, you tell a story, I tell a story, you tell a story, I tell a story, you tell a story. Now, it may seem on the surface that that kind of a pattern really couldn't have a lot of empathy in it. But I have one old friend for whom that is the conversational pattern. And yet I feel empathy, care, and connection with that person. And I've really been pondering, why is that? Where does the empathy come from? And it comes from two things. This friend does not use any of those minimal encouragers, yeah. This friend does not ask follow-up questions. This friend does not do any reflecting back, you felt sad, or you seem to be upset about that. No reflecting. But this person uses silence really well. And I'll tell a story, and the person won't jump in with their own story right after. They'll leave a little, some beats of silence. And sometimes in that silence, I realize, oh, I'm not really done yet. And so then I talk a little bit more about that topic. That's just amazing. And then also the eye contact and the body language, the attentive eye contact and body language really make me feel heard, even if there aren't the more what I would call typical signs of empathy. And the third kind of conversational pattern, and the second kind of back and forth, is where I perhaps talk about something that's on my mind, and the person uses those minimal encouragers, and they ask a question or two, and they reflect back. You felt sad, you look upset. They I can see in your body language that really meant a lot to you, whatever. That the person uses those various things to draw me out, and then my need need to talk about it slows because I've been heard. And maybe I change and ask the other person a question. How are you doing? Tell me about how you're doing. And then that person has the floor for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes. But the back and forth involves, when the one person's talking, a great deal of drawing out. And I will say, like talking with a neighbor, I can be platforming the neighbor, and I can say something about my own experience briefly as a way to draw out the neighbor. It isn't just questions that draw people out. I really have noticed this. So let's say the neighbor's talking about the vacation in the house. And I might say, one time that I shared a house with a bunch of people, it was the kitchen that was the area of conflict. So just an observation from my experience to see whether she wants to go in that direction, whether she's, wants to say anything about that, whatever she's thinking. So these different patterns of conversation are something I'm really thinking about now. So I want to give you one more little period of silence right here at the end before we go. I want to pray for you at the very end, but take another 20 seconds and think about someone who showed you empathy and evidence of empathy, not just listening skills, but including listening skills. What was the evidence of empathy that the people showed, or the person showed you in that conversation? Okay, I'll make it 15 seconds since we're getting to the end, but just think about the evidence of empathy. What could that be? And now I want to pray for all of you who are listening to this. Dear Lord, we long to use the skill of empathy appropriately. We long to show care for the people who we care about. We care about them. That's the point. We want to show the care. We do not want to be overly enmeshed. We do not want to be overly emotional when the person is showing us cat food or how to water their plants. We want to do this appropriately. So, Lord, teach us how to engage our minds, how to engage our emotions, and how to engage our whole bodies in showing empathy for people. Give us wisdom, and dear Lord Jesus, shape us into your image. You were such an amazing, amazing listener. I pray in Jesus' name, amen. So it's been great being with you. And I hope that your listening will have some new wonderful characteristics to it. Take care.